Okay, Birshut Avi Mori. I noticed this. My father's on one of the screens. So welcome, my father. Welcome everyone who's joining us. Obviously, to state the obvious, we gather once more online in a virtual manner, but we're trying as best we can once again to make sure that we're getting together as a congregation, albeit virtually, to keep up with all of the ways that, or to the extent that we can, keep up with all the ways that we as a shul continue to function. One of those is with thanks to Lynn Shapiro, and I'll throw in Irv as well, year over year, and Baruch Rofei Cholim, year over year, making sure that we have Kristallnacht observances, and for Yom HaShoa as well. And now, after all these years, I could say I'm zoche to be a beneficiary of their initiative and their planning of these kinds of events. It's incredibly important. Our shul this past summer ran a mission. We did a heritage mission to Poland and to Israel. And for the participants on it, I think it was extremely impactful. I was one of them, zoche to be one of them. I consider it to be very impactful as well on a personal level. We gather this year now, Yom HaShoah, just after the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. To be sure, the Holocaust it has so many layers and so many elements that characterize the Shoah, so many aspects, so many people who were thrown into it and who were affected by it. That's before we get to the 6 million. And we should recognize that it's impossible in any commemorative venue to truly memorialize all of them, or even a fraction of them. What we've tried to do each year is to have 6 candles kindled this year. Each one will be kindled in respective homes. And I'm just going to introduce each person. It's not really, doesn't involve really speaking so much, but if you could put yourself, I'll put it on gallery view, so we can hopefully find the people. I don't know how to put someone on gallery view per se. I'll see if I can do it. To be able to light these 6 candles, and I'll tell you who they are, and I'll ask each of them to light those candles as we go. Okay, so the first candle is here. I think I can do this. 1 second. The first candle will be lit by Mrs. Pearl Schiffman, a survivor from Poland, who will be lighting together with her daughter, Minna Berger. Sorry, we're figuring this out as we go. Apologies that it's, I'm looking for Erica Khan, will be lighting the second candle. Baruch Hashem, 95 participants, but the downside is it's very hard to find people. So 1 second. You can put this code in. On the top, it's going to ask you to push something, punch something in. Okay, the second candle will be lit by Erica Khan, a survivor from Slovakia. Erica survived the war hiding together with her mother. The third candle will be lit by George Bornstein, a child of survivors whose parents, Benjamin Banish and Frumit Bornstein, were from Poland, and by Razi Bornstein, a child of survivors whose father, Yitzchak Leistner, was from Poland. The fourth candle will be lit by Monica Magid, who's a child of survivors. Her parents, Ludwig and Eva Hoffman, were from Germany. The fifth candle will be lit by Shula Wenig, a child of survivors. Her father, Yitzchak Ovich, was from Romania, and her mother, Chaya Minster, is from the Ukraine. The sixth candle will be lit by Linda Weisbrot, a child of survivors. Her parents, Morris and Faye Weiss, were from Czechoslovakia, and by Stan Weisbrot, child of survivors whose parents, Joe and Riva Weisbrot, were from Poland. These 6 candles that we kindle remind us, Ner L'chol Neshama, every neshama that was taken from us, from Klal Yisrael, from these families, and from all families, are each of them representative of the neshamas of Klal Yisrael. Unfortunately, we're only able to light 6 candles to represent the 6 million, when in reality, of course, we should be lighting 6 million candles. We recognize, as Chazal teach us, that in point of fact, Ner Hashem Nishmar Adam, we learn this from the book of Mishlei, that the candle of Hashem, the lamp of Hashem, is the soul of a human being. As we gather now on the 75th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz, as the memory begins to recede, and we see that the enemies of history are in our midst, it is so imperative for each of us, those tonight who have lit the candles, those of us who are first-generation survivors, those of us who bear witness, who were not personally survivors and not actually children or grandchildren of survivors, but nonetheless, we have an abiding connection to all things related to the Shoah. Our congregation is honored to be able to have among its members, I hope he made it onto the call, one of our members, Steve Katz. He is in fact on the call. Steve was reluctant to speak about his experience for many years, and I will give credit where credit is due. Was thanks very much to a few people who pushed hard, Lynn Shapiro among them, to try to urge Steve to please tell us his story. Steve, of course, is a survivor of Kristallnacht, and his story, which we heard in full, or close to in full, just a number of years ago, is archived on our shul archive. I was zoche to go with Steve and Ellie. They spoke at Hillel Torah to the middle schoolers not too long ago. And once again, what a zchut it was and remains for all of us in our congregation to continue to have Steve and Ellie in our midst and to be able to share this evening with us, as sad as it is. I called Steve before this evening, and I wanted to make sure that he'd be joining us on the call together with Ellie, and he obliged. He told me that he has a 3-minute story that he neglected to share the last couple of times when he spoke publicly about his experiences, but that he really wanted to share this evening. I'm going to put him on now to share that story with us. I don't know if he's on video. I think he's only on audio this evening. He'll share that story. It's a 3-minute story that is deeply meaningful to him. He heard it from a friend of his, Rabbi Manfred Fulda. I know him as Rabbi Meir Fulda, Zichron Livracha, who was also from Germany. this story was a story that when Rabbi Fulda told it to Rav Soloveitchik told Rabbi Fulda, you should tell this story whenever you speak. So Steve took this on as well, and tonight he wanted to share. It's a 3-minute story that Steve was going to share with us at this time. 1 minute, Steve. I just want to unmute you. Half a sec.
Hello.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes,
Hello.
we're all on the call. There's 106 people on the call with us here, and many people on Facebook Live who are also listening in. So if you could just speak up and share your story with us that you wanted to share this evening, it'll be a great zchut. Thank you.
Soon after the war, there was a Schlachthaus in southern France, which was used by our Shoftim on occasion. And on one particular occasion, the guard refused to close the door after the Shoftim left because he claimed one of them did not come out. After some discussion with the manager, where it was certified that he did not count people, but he knew that one didn't come out. So anyway, after long discussion, they decided they would search the Schlachthaus. They went from cooling room to cooling room, and finally they did find one of the Shoftim locked into a cooling room, and he couldn't open the door to come out. Had they not found him, of course, he would have suffocated. He would have frozen to death overnight. So on the way out, the manager asked the guard, "How did you know you didn't count?" He said, "Well, these men, they came in their black hats and their black coats. They came in and they went out, and they didn't know I existed, except for one man. He always spoke with me. He inquired after my welfare, my children, and what have you. And he didn't come out. He didn't talk to me on the way out, so I knew he didn't come out." And this is the story that Rav Soloveitchik believed was the ikor of menschlichkeit, that every time, well, you can draw your own conclusions from this, okay? Anyhow, there's one other thought that I have to share with you. That after the war, there were British Chayalim, Israeli Chayalim, who were part of the of the British Army, and they took their discharges in Germany or in Europe and worked in the camps for Bricha. Now, in addition to the Bricha work, they also did Kiruv. And how did they do Kiruv? To find Jewish children who had been given over to German people to raise in secret. So they went into the schools and they gave presentations or what have you, and they asked the children to join them in saying Shema Yisrael. And of course, you know what a Jewish child does when he says Shema. He puts his hand over his face, over his eyes. And that's how they discovered Jewish children and liberated them and brought them to Israel. Anyhow, seid mir all gesund und stark. And
thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone to say what a great zchut it is once again to have you on this call with us, and to know that we're a part of a shul that has you and Ellie in its midst. It's a longe urine. There's a hibben and 20 yor just to keep well. And I thank you very much. I want to turn it over to Lynn Shapiro, who again I mentioned when we got on the call this evening, has really been a driving force. She's on the board of directors of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it's been a great zchut to know her and Irv ongoing. It was also a great zchut a few years ago when we heard from beloved mother Zichronah Livracha, who left the world just over a year ago now. Margit Kirsch of blessed memory. I was not zocha to know Sander Kirsch of blessed memory, also a member of our shul, of course, for many years. And I could turn it over to Lynn to share a few thoughts this evening It was really at my insistence that she had shared something with me that was private, and I urged her, please, please, can you share it on the call? And I thank you so much for obliging me. Please, Lynn.
So thank you, Rabbi Engel, as I say every year, really for supporting this endeavor, for really standing behind and feeling the importance of Yom HaShoah and of commemorating Yom HaShoah in Or Torah. Every year I usually stand up and look around Or Torah, and I'm filled with such immense emotion. I stand and I realize, looking around the room, that we commemorate Yom HaShoah together as one community, as one heart. And this year, I'm skimming through Zoom and I'm realizing the depth of the commemoration this year. And in addition to being grateful that we are here together to remember, I feel deep gratitude. Irv personally and our family has gone through a very challenging time in the midst of everyone else who was also going through this time together. And I and my entire family, I'm sure I speak for Irv, we are all so grateful for this community's bond and support, as always. This year, Yom HaShoah seems to take on a much deeper meaning. And for me personally, and I know for many, many other children of survivors, I constantly look to that era and to my parents' experience for their guidance during this time. The Shoah was different. I believe that the Shoah cannot be compared to anything. And yet, on so many levels, we can draw lessons on how we face this challenge. And for that, first, I want to stand here and recognize the survivors tonight who have been part of Or Torah, who are here with us tonight. Those here tonight, Steve Katz, Erica Kahn, Pearl Shipman, and those who have been really supporting us and guiding us through the years. Each year on Leil HaSeder, when we reach the point in the Haggadah where we sing, V'hi she'amda lavotenu velanu, v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. My eyes fill with tears. I think of all the times during the history of Am Yisrael that we have had very, very challenging times. And we think, how can this continue? How can we go on? How can we survive? But we have emunah and we persevere. While at my parents' home, we remembered the exodus from Egypt at the Seder. Also in our home, when my parents were with us and since, not only do we remember the story of Egypt, but for my parents and for us, the Seder brought to life the Shoah. Specifically on Pesach, because it was right after Pesach that both my parents were taken to the ghetto and then to Auschwitz. It brought the Seder and Yetziat Mitzrayim, started the stories and brought to life the Shoah, the horrific time that they and their families lived through. The Nazis tried to annihilate the entire Jewish people, but they survived. Even though so many of their families died tragic deaths at the hands of the Nazis, but as an Am Yisrael, we the Jewish people have survived. And so every year I ask myself, what is V'hi? What has actually stood for us through the generations and the challenges? Yes, I know there are lots of different interpretations on what V'hi means. The Vav is Shisha, Sidrei, Mishnah, all different interpretations. But for me, V'hi seems very clear. We can just look at where we are today, and we can learn from those lessons of Pesach 1944, when my parents, as well as so many Jews from Hungary and Czechoslovakia, had their very last Pesach in their home before being taken to the ghetto and ultimately to Auschwitz. My father used to tell the story of Pesach because his family made the matzah for their entire town in their home. And he came home just 2 weeks before Pesach when the Nazis had marched into Budapest, and he had to sneak and kind of find his way home. And he used to say it was not the same. His father had already been taken because he was put on the Jewish committee in Unvar, and he was not home for Pesach. But my father said, nevertheless, we made Pesach. We made Pesach as best as we could. And this year, we did the same. We made Pesach. Not the same as always, but we made Pesach. And so, what is Vihi? I believe it is our emunah, our faith. As the story of Rabbi Akiva, who saw the fox come out of the Beit HaMikdash, who knew that since the worst came true, therefore the best of times would also come true. Our perseverance, our hakarat hatov for all that we have, for all those who help us, and to Hakadosh Baruch Hu for every breath we take. It is our fervent belief in our future. And on a personal note, let me say that the birth of our new granddaughter, born just days after Irv came home, having survived his ordeal with COVID-19, named after her two great grandmothers who survived the Shoah with strength and with optimism. For us, that represents to our future. It is our belief in the shining future of Am Yisrael. It is our inner strength and our optimism that we hold on to, and with which we so deeply believe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam. It is that strength, it is that we carry with us, and our optimism and hope. So this year, when we think of that song, when we sang it on Pesach, and when we think for the future, let's think of our family. We should think of our ancestors, our families who passed on our traditions, our faith, our hope, and our optimism. And as we remember on Yom HaShoah, those who did not survive, and those who did survive, who are no longer here, we should think of their strength, and we should think of our future with deep gratitude, with belief that we know Bashana Haba'ah, Neshev al HaMerpesek, Kama Tov Yihya Bashana Haba'ah. And I want to thank all of you who are here, who commemorate every year, and to Rabbi Engel again for really persevering with this every single year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I thought tonight to address the most recent loss, you could say, in the survivor community. As far as I could tell, I'd missed it. I don't know if anyone else saw it. Someone on this call, in fact, alerted to me only recently that on the last day of Adar, on the 25th of March of this year, what is believed to be the individual, the last living individual who was one of the Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, left the world. His name was Dario Gabai. He was working as a Sonderkommando in Auschwitz-Birkenau. For the uninitiated, if there are younger people on the call, yes, it is true that the Sonderkommando were the people who were in charge of the gas chambers. They were the prisoners who were forced to drag bodies to the crematoria to be incinerated. For almost 3 years, 2,000 Sonderkommandos did this work under the threat of execution. Every 6 months, the Germans would replace the Sonderkommandos, and we know that there were approximately only 100 who survived the war. This man, Dario Gabai, who left the world on the last day of Adar of this year, is believed to be the last of the Sonderkommando. And he has now left the world. He did work on a handful of Holocaust documentaries, including The Last Days from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which won an Academy Award for the best documentary in 1999, as well as some other films that he spoke in, together with other relatives, in fact, cousins, with whom he served together. Upon arrival at Auschwitz, Dario saw his father, his mother, and his youngest brother dispatched to the gas chambers. He had a sister who died as an infant before Auschwitz. He was athletic, he was muscular, he was 21. He and his older brother Jacob were selected to serve as Sonderkommando. And soon he was disposing of the bodies of those newly arrived Hungarian Jews. According to Michael Berenbaum of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, there were 6,000 people killed each day at that time. He's also a professor in Los Angeles. Mr. Gabay, in all of his testimony, would say that he could hear the hundreds of women and children screaming after the doors were locked. He could hear them crying, scratching the walls in a desperate effort to breathe. When the doors opened, he and the other Sonderkommando had to climb over bodies piled 5 and 6 feet high to harvest glasses, gold teeth, and prosthetic limbs, and then to haul the corpses out and wash down the floors and the walls that were covered. Terrible things with blood and excrement and the like. He describes how he became an automaton. He couldn't even react to anything that he was seeing anymore. He told his friends that he had totally shut down. The Germans, the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, preferred to use Greek Jews and Ladino-speaking Jews for this purpose because they could not easily communicate with their Polish, Hungarian, and other European inmates. They had seen too much, and they knew too much. Dario Gabay survived, and he went on to tell his story. And now he has left the world as we gather for tonight's Yom HaShoah. The burden of memory, the responsibility of memory, doubles, I would say, annually with each passing year. I want to share with you tonight a few Torah thoughts that have been on my mind of late, particularly in light of exactly as Lynn spoke so beautifully, so eloquently, so passionately about the moment that we find ourselves in. In my view, Ani HaKatan, there is not almost a single iota of comparison at all between what we are going through now as a community and globally and what Klal Yisrael, our parents, grandparents, in some cases already great-grandparents, our relatives went through Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael during the period of the Shoah. A friend of mine wanted to give a Shabbos Hagadol drasha, and he spoke about how we have to take a model from the survivors, and it should be for us also in our Pesach. And of course, Lynn can say it. She's actually a child of survivors. Of course, we draw strength. But a friend of mine told me, he said, he's a rabbi of a shul. He got a very irate call from a child of survivors who said to him, my parents spent Pesach in a camp. I'm in my house with my food and my matzah and my everything. How can I complain? And it's true, and it's true. There's no comparison. And yet, we're asked always to go back each time to glean lessons from our past to the extent that we can. The word that's been used over and over again about the crisis that we're in now is the word unprecedented. It is unprecedented that in the history of Klal Yisrael, there should be so few people in the world who can get together to go to shul together as Jews. But I want to share with you some ideas that made it through the inferno, that have spoken to me over the years. They come from a milk crate, like a milk jug. It was made out of metal. It was buried. There were 3 such troves. It was known as the Onik Shabbos ring. It was run by a man named Emmanuel Ringelblum, Hashem Yikom Damo. And in his circle, they tried to amass as many documents as they could from within the Warsaw Ghetto. Many are the memoirs that were written about the Shoah, much of the testimony that's been given. But we actually have the words written by someone contemporaneous to the Shoah. It was the last sefer written in a ghetto, contemporaneous to the events during the Warsaw Ghetto. They were written by a very well-known, at least in our shul, I hope he's well-known already, Economist Common Shapiro, the Admiral of Piaseczna. What you see on your screen now, you can't see this on Facebook Live. I'm sorry, we had technical issues. We sort of jerry-rigged that people could watch Facebook Live. But if you're watching on Zoom, you can see this now on your screen. This is a book that was put out within the last few years by a professor named Daniel Reiser. He lives in Israel. He's part of the Michal Herzog of next to Yeshivat Har Etzion. Here's a picture on the cover of the book of one of the milk jugs, call it milk jug, that had this trove material in it. It was found in the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto. The backdrop here on the cover of his book is actually the handwriting of the Rebbe, Rabbi Clomis Kalman Shapiro. I'm going to share with you two thoughts tonight from this book, both of which I believe are particularly germane to our circumstance. You see, the Polish government will not part with the original manuscripts, and therefore Daniel Reiser went to live in Warsaw at the Polish Historical Institute in Warsaw, where he spent years poring over the actual original manuscripts. And he put out two books. One book is actually a facsimile of the words as they were written by the Rebbe himself. And each entry, as you can see, is numbered on the top of the page. And it tells you what it was about. It's impossible almost for us to read these words. It looks like little chicken scroll. These drushas end in the summer of 1942. They end right after what is called the Great Deportation. The Great Deportation was already when they started emptying the Warsaw Ghetto. Rabbi Clomis Kalman Shapiro, who had already suffered the loss of his only son and his daughter-in-law and various other relatives, had one daughter left, Reichel Yehudis. On August the 14th, 1942, she was in that great deportation. The Rebbe here had written a drasha a year earlier on Hanukkah. And he wrote in the drasha a little piece here, which is very hard to read. What he basically writes here, I highlighted for you, is that in the Churban of the Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the temple, and at the time of the destruction of Beitar, the events that are happening to us is exactly what happened to them, meaning there's precedent. Now look with me at this little letter here. It's a tiny little letter bet. This little letter bet that's here goes to the bottom of the page. You see, the Rebbe came back again to the same drasha a year later, and this is the last note that the Eish Kodesh, as he is known, Rabbi Clomis Kalman Shapiro, ever wrote in his work. It's right here on the bottom of the page. He wrote it in the year Tuf Shin Gimel in Kislev. He came back to it in December 1942. So it's impossible to read these words, but Daniel Reiser put out this annotated edition. Let's read together what he wrote so you'll understand what happened. Here on the top of the page, the top of the page, he wrote, B'churban Beit HaMikdash b'Beitar v'chulei hayu k'mo elu. We had this circumstance already. This, what we have now in Europe, is what happened to them is happening to us. Little letter bet. The bottom of the page is the chicken scrawled handwriting that is now written by the Rebbe. And now Daniel Reiser wrote it up as a footnote. Haga, footnote. Rak shatzarat shahayu ad shili dishnat tafshin bet hayu kvar. It's only the bad things, the terrible things that happened until Elul of 1942. Aval shatzarat mishunot, but now the suffering has become so terrible. Umitot rod mishunot, and terrible death that's happening. Shechidshu harishayim harotzim hamisunim, that these wicked murderers have made for us. Aleinu Beit Yisrael, against the Jewish people. Here in the notes, it's crossed out. You can read through the cross out. He originally wrote in his note, it seems to me that there was no such thing. He crossed it out. He wrote instead, Mishilhi Tafshin Bet, from the end of Tafshin Bet, meaning the end of August 14, 1942, is Rosh Chodesh Elul. Lefia Diati, according to what I know, B'divrei Chazal, B'divrei Hayamim, Lo haya, bottom line, lo haya kmotam. There has never been something like what's happening to us now, the Jews of Europe. He wrote this, Vashem Yerachem Aleinu, Hashem shall have mercy upon us, V'yatzilenu miyadam. Lynn and I didn't coordinate what she was going to say. V'akadosh Baruch matzilenu miyadam, that's what he wrote here. V'yatzilenu miyadam keref ayin, like the blink of an eye. When did he write it? Friday, Erev Shabbat Kodesh, the 18th of Kislev, right before Hanukkah, Tafshin Gimel, meaning at the end of 1942. And it writes here, HaMechaber. These are the last words that the Admor of Piasetzna ever wrote in his book. There's a professor at Touro College, his name is Henry Abramson, who put out a fantastic, crucial book. It's called Torah from the Years of Wrath. And the book is about the historical context. You see, when the Rebbe wrote, he didn't write about events that happened. He just wrote drushes, one sermon after the next. Abramson calls it the Aesopian model, like Aesop. He wrote it like Aesop's fables. He didn't want to put in about Nazis, about murderers, about events that happened in the ghetto. He just put in basic Torahs. And here he writes that, right here, quotes from the Haggadah that Lynn just mentioned moments ago. In every generation, etc., the prior generations that had witnessed the horrible persecution, there'll be overly optimistic Jews no longer need fear persecution in the future. So the Rebbe's thought begins by saying, this is the same thing as before. But then he comes back and he says there's a sharp break with everything that's ever happened before. And this is the English translation of what I just read to you in Hebrew with the translation. He writes, in my opinion, from the words of the sages of blessed memory, the Chronicles of Jewish people in general, there was never anything like them. And God should have mercy upon us. The Admor of Piasetzna lived through something unprecedented. But it turns out when you live through something unprecedented, whatever that challenge is going to be, you're the precedent for the next one. Each time Klal Yisrael has gone through terrible times, it's always been a little bit different. We're going through a challenging time, friends. But I think we need to take a certain strength, even from Yom HaShoah. And again, without drawing comparisons, it's impossible. Impossible. And yet to realize exactly, Lynn, as you said it just now so beautifully, how we need still to draw strength from people who endured circumstances, different though they might have been. This week is Parshat Tazria Mitzorah around the world. Let me tell you what the Rebbe says, the Parshat Tazria Mitzorah. I don't have time to read the whole thing inside. This is already the printed edition that I'm showing you from Daniel Reiser. It's 2 volumes, the books, 2 volumes. So this is from the other volume where it's printed up. The Torah tells us in Parshat Mitzorah, when you come to the land of Canaan, Kitavo, Eretz Canaan, when you arrive in the land, what's going to happen? I'm going to give you a negat tzarat bebeit eretz achuzatchem. There'll be a tzarat, this kind of strange disease, sometimes translated as leprosy. It's going to come onto the house. Rashi says when this comes onto the house, it's news for you, to give you a signal that eventually, when you get through the period of time of the nega on the house, you'll realize that actually the nations that lived here before you in the land of Canaan hid gold in the walls. You'll have great gifts, great things that will come about after the period of confinement. Says the Piasetzna, I want to understand, if that's true, so why did everyone have to be confined in a house for 7 days before? Why don't you just say, as soon as you see the problem with the house, don't confine yourself, open the house, and instead, 7 days you have to wait confined in the house, and then you break open the stones. Now, when did the Piasetzner say this? Nobody knew when he said it. It was just listed as the year was Tafshin, 1940. Now look what Henry Abramson taught us that we never knew. And you see, if you see resonance here, again, it's not the same thing. Our enemy here is not the same enemy. And our challenge is not the same challenge by any stretch of the imagination. Lo yu'man, it's beyond belief to try to put ourselves in that place of what these people went through, and I welcome all the heroic survivors who are with us. Here's a picture of the Admor Piasetzna. Look at what Henry Abramson taught us. Nobody knew this until he came about. In early April 1940, Warsaw Jews were distressed to witness the initial construction of walls in several parts of the city. Up until this point, the concentration of Jews in certain parts of Warsaw was effected by administrative decree with few permanent physical structures demarcating the boundaries of the ghetto. Debates raised within the Nazi bureaucracy over the utility of a ghetto and the inconvenience it would pose on the non-Jewish population, disrupting transport and access to various institutions located in the area. Arguments over the specific boundaries of the Jewish district continued for months, requiring periodic adjustments, but the ominous meaning of the barrier was not lost on the Jews. They were to be sealed in. Chernikov, as head of the Judenrat, was charged with the implementation of the Nazi order. The Jews were to supply both the materials and the labor. The Rebbe's sermon of April 13, 1940, Parshat Mitzorah, addressed the concerns of the community in his typically Aesopian manner, drawing contemporary relevance from the ancient Torah reading and presenting it in an oblique manner that would be understood on multiple levels by his audience. He began by citing Rashi's comment regarding the treatment of physical structure placed under quarantine after it showed signs of the plague, known as Tzarat. After 7 days of quarantine, the home was to be destroyed, and according to the Medrash, the inhabitants of the home then discovered treasures previously hidden in the walls by the Amorites who lived there before the Israelites' conquest of Canaan. Let us understand, says Rabbi Klonimus Kalman. Now this is the translation of Henry Abramson. Writes the Admiral of Piasetzna. Let us understand, if such is the case, why is one required to seal the house for 7 days at the outset and only afterwards remove the stones? Once the plague is visible, one knows that treasures are to be found there. This is especially true according to the understanding of Nachmanides, cited, he writes, in the works of my Holy Father, that plagues on houses and clothing are supernatural occurrences and are only for the benefit of the Jewish people in order to reveal the hidden treasures. Why then does the Torah command us to render the house impure at the onset of the 7 days? To restate the Rebbe's question, if the Tzarat is to be understood as a supernatural signal to the Jews that there are hidden treasures in the walls, what is the point of the quarantine? Shouldn't the Jews simply destroy the walls once the first indications of Tzarat are evident? One can only imagine how his question must have electrified his Hasidim, seeking guidance in the meaning of the walls, under construction in Warsaw. The Rebbe's reference to Amorite treasure alluded to a hidden benefit in the walls, but at the same time his words contained a hint of rebellion. Was he advocating that the construction of walls be sabotaged? He continued. Here's the Rebbe again. In truth, the intent of the Torah and its commandments are beyond our grasp. We can, however, perceive illusions, for we know and believe that all that God does for us, his words, not mine, his words, even heaven forbid when God strikes us, writes the Rebbe, is all for our benefit. At the present time, we see, however, we are not solely smitten with physical afflictions, but also, heaven forbid, with those that distance us from the Blessed One. There is neither primary Torah school nor yeshiva, neither base medrash, study hall in which to pray as a congregation, nor mikveh, and so on. Consequently, a glimmer of doubt, heaven forbid, arises within us. Is it possible that even now God's intent is for our benefit? If it is for our benefit, God should have chastised us with those things which would have drawn us closer, not with the cessation of Torah study and prayer, and heaven forbid the fulfillment of the entire Torah. Before answering his own question, the Rebbe probed further by specifically referring to the present condition of Warsaw Jewry. The punishments of the spring of 1940 seemed to serve only to distance Jews from their spiritual occupation. How could the walls possibly hold good tidings for the Jews of Warsaw? What did they mean? And how should Hasidim relate to the construction? The Rebbe returned to this question by digging deeper into Talmudic teaching on the, I believe he meant to say, quarantined home, which noted that only a member of the priestly caste had the authority to place the home under quarantine. A non-priest, even an expert, may only render an opinion. Writes the Rebbe, a person must only say it resembles a plague. Kinnega nirali. It resembles a plague, but not actually that it is a plague. Even a Torah scholar who knows that it is in fact a plague must nonetheless say it resembles a plague, because a person is incapable of saying if it is in truth a plague or affliction. It is a matter of perception, such that one must say it resembles a plague. Kinnega nirali. Whereas in truth, it is an act of benevolence to the Jewish people by means of which God does good for us. The Rebbe's concluding words contain several distinct messages. First, he validated the suffering of the Jews and its deleterious impact on their spiritual growth. Second, he remained steadfast in his faith that the developments were somehow beneficial in the larger plan of the Almighty. I would throw in parenthetically, we're still waiting to understand what that benefit might have been in the larger plan of the Almighty. I know I am. I don't understand it. But finally, like the expert who is not a member of the priestly caste, the Rebbe can only state that it resembles a nega, a plague. He could not definitively pronounce that it was in fact a plague, thereby initiating the quarantine and subsequent discovery of the treasure. By analogy, he could only speculate as to the meaning of the ghetto walls. It resembles a plague, but at the same time he believed with perfect faith that there was an ultimate divine purpose which would ultimately be revealed as a valuable treasure. His response to his Hasidim, troubled by the meaning of the walls, validated their fears, but urged them to strengthen their faith in divine providence, to validate fear, and yet to find a way to strengthen emunah in Hashgachat Hashem in the world. The circumstances are different. There's no question. But is that not what we're called to do these days, my friends? For those who are alone, I've tried to say again and again, I'll continue to say, you are not alone. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you in your home. That may feel like small balm for the wound of loneliness and isolation, but we're going to get through this, friends. The fact that we were able to get together, I have 112 people on this call, on the Zoom call, and we have so many other people, I don't even know the number, on Facebook, is testament to the strength and vitality of our shul and shuls like it. Every single day, 10 minutes after the post time for Mincha, we're saying Tehillim together for a lot of different people who Nebuch are stricken with this machla and that machla, including the current machla as well, the current plague, the current virus. All week long, shiurim are going nonstop. The Daf Yomi has not ceased. Not one day did it miss. Our shiurim are going. Rabbi Sprung, myself, Rabbi Turaf, all the shiurim are still going. Everybody is still doing what we need to do to the extent that we can. We have limitations. In closing tonight, before the Kel Mole, I want to share with you a video that I put together today that I tried to put together that I thought would help evoke some of the emotions that I've been feeling, particularly since this past summer when I was zocheh to go on this trip, the Orator Heritage trip to Poland and Israel. God willing, we're planning to do another trip in a year from now. Who knows what we'll be up to. And next year in Tafshin Pei Aleph, we should all just live and be well. It should be safe enough to do such a thing. But I want to share with you, speaking of Greek Jews, we spoke before about Dario Gabbai, who left the world. It reminded me about those Greek women who in Martin Gilbert's book, The Holocaust, his seminal work on the Shoah, were put into the gas chamber, and Lena Berg from Warsaw was an eyewitness to the death of these girls from Greece. That they were brought to Auschwitz only weeks before, slendered, black-eyed, against the sleet and cold of northern October. They sang a sentimental song called Mama, whose melody made me weep. In a few weeks, Auschwitz had withered those exotic flowers. Their very eyes had become dull and sunken sockets, empty and dead. Emaciated, dirty, repulsive, those Greek women could barely drag themselves around. Once so shapely, they now had legs like sticks, and their breasts hung like bags. Their complexions, made velvet smooth by the southern sun, were now covered with horrible abscesses, vermin bites, and the marks of scabies incessantly scratched. They stank of gangrene, dysentery, unwashed sweat, and wretchedness. When they went to their deaths, Lena Berg testifies, they sang Hatikva, that song of undying hope, the song of an old people, which has always carried the vision of Zion in its heart. Since then, Lena Berg, who survived the Shoah, since then, every time I hear Hatikva, I always see them, the dregs of human misery. And I know that through mankind flows a stream of eternity greater and more powerful than individual deaths. Please watch this 6-minute video that I put together today. I hope it'll resonate for you. I took some footage when we were in Poland this summer, particularly focused on Auschwitz. And it should be self-explanatory. There's one point where there's a document on the page in front of you, on the screen rather. This document is in the Auschwitz Museum. It is the original, handwritten testimony of one of the Sonderkommando who did not survive, but who hid with other people their testimonies in a thermos, which was recovered right after the Shoah. That's the only document. Everything else is in pictures. I think it'll probably be self-explanatory. I'm sorry that people on Facebook Live, I'll try to put it on after for you. We'll post it on Facebook Live. At the conclusion of this film, Rabbi Sprung will lead us in the Kelmole, and then we'll close as we always do by singing the Ani Mamin together. Please, I hope you'll be able to watch it on the screen, and again, for Facebook Live, at least be able to hear it. And afterward, you can watch it on your own time on Facebook.
nishma, mirama nishma, hirochel mivako, yaboneho, hirochel mivako, yaboneho,
I'd like to ask Rabbi Sprung to please recite the Kel Mali.
El Male Rachamim, Dayan Amanot Vavi Yitomim, Al Na Techashav V'hit, V'tita Pak L'dam Yisrael Shenishpach Kamayim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanpei HaShechina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim, Utorim Kezor HaRakia, Masirim, Et Nishmot Shesh Meot, Revot Alfei Yisrael, Anashim V'nashim, ילדים וילדות, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו ושנשחטו, ושנשרפו ושנטבעו, ושנחנקו ושנקברו חיים, על קידוש השם, בידי המרצחים הנאצים הארורים, ועוזריהם משאר העמים, יימח שמם וזכרם. כולם קידושים וטהורים, ובהם גאונים וצדיקים, ארזי הלבנון, ואדירי התורה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, בעבור שכל הקהל הקדוש הזה ייתנו צדקה בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסרים בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, ויזכור לנו עקדתם, ותעמוד לנו ולכל ישראל זכותם. ארץ אל תכסי דמם, ואל יהי מקום לזעקתם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין, ונאמר אמן.
אמן. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה שלמה, בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח, אני מאמין, ואף על פי שהתממיה, עם כל זה אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה שלמה, בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שהתממיה, עם כל זה אני מאמין. Yiratzin, we should be zochem between now and the next year. We should not have to have a Yom HaShoa v'Hagvura, but rather we should be gathered in to Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, the Biat Goel Tzedek, B'meher B'yameinu. Until then, it is our job to continue to remember Zachor al Tishkach. We look forward to that great day. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu wipe the tears off of every face. We should gather together in the future for symbols.